We're back. We're live at Expert35, and as promised, experts from 35 different industries talking about the challenges, the hardship, and the opportunities. Well, today we're going to be talking about the opportunities because of all the challenges that are happening, especially with student mental health. And couldn't have anybody better than Tammer. Tammer, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you?
Good. Thank you for having me on. I'm glad to be here.
Now, so timely. I mean, so many things have changed, and all of a sudden, our I was gonna say our reputation, but it's actually everything's changing, right? Like the new normal is not normal. What we used to do is changing our balance, changing our mental health. But before we jump into there, let's, if you want to join the conversation, text Expert35. This is going to be a really interesting conversation. Really want to learn more about what you do. If you want to learn more about Tammer, he is Expert65, and you'll be able to get in touch with him. Tell us a little bit of how do you get into this? Why do you do what you do?
Yeah, so, you know, really the way I got into working with students, teens, young adults was, you know, I wasn't your poster child for success as a teenager. Um,
Mm,
I struggled mightily. I was diagnosed with ADHD when I can't remember, 12 or 13 years old. And, once I kind of got into high school, I struggled. I struggled to fit in with a good crowd. I got involved in some pretty bad stuff, and over the years, my parents kind of counselor shopped me around, and I went to quite a few therapists, and I really just struggled to connect. I don't know if it was me, but really the sense I got was like I wasn't really seen as a person to a lot of these therapists. I felt like I walked in and I was seen as a problem. And um and but I finally did find a therapist and a group of people that I really connected with, and it really kind of changed the course of my entire life. I got clean when I was 17 years old. And when I went to college, college is a place where you kind of figure out what you want to do. And I tried a lot of different routes, and I kind of came out on the side of I'm not a 9 to 5 desk job kind of guy. I need to be working with people. And so that's kind of how I found this industry, and I've loved it, every day.
Well, and I think your experience is what gives you that heart and the opportunity to see things because you kind of flew under the radar, and a lot of people do, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I went from being a competitive athlete to getting hurt, and I think part of it was just how I compensated. I think we're all products of like a different addiction. Like, how do you supplement? And when that
Yeah.
carpet's changed, right? I mean, one of the things you were said that really resonated is like this COVID and this lockdown is exposing our flaws. Let's talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so especially with teens, is like if you were one of those kids that kind of liked video games, but you were involved in a lot of activities and got away for the weekend, well, now you got an excuse, and a lot of people have become complete isolationists, right? If you were one of those students that kind of procrastinated and struggled to, sit in a class for 50 minutes, well, now you can just have a Zoom call up and have 12 different tabs open, and not really be paying attention. And so I think we kind of undervalued some of the things, like what going to school felt like, right? Like we undervalued like the social aspects of school, the extracurriculars. We undervalued time, like free time in class where you're talking with your friends, and so I do think COVID kind of exposed a lot of our weaknesses, and our propensities to do things like engage in a lot of wasteful activities, video games, social media. And so you know, I think we can look at it as like an opportunity, but we can't keep our head in the sand anymore because these things are coming out, and eventually, I hope we go back to normal. And if we're not preparing ourselves for what it's going to be like when we go back to shaking people's hands and having a conversation without masks. Like, we're gonna see a lot of people mightily struggle.
Well, and this is a great question. We had a question from Greg. What are the warning signs that somebody may need help?
So if we're talking about a teenager, right? Like with teenage boys, like, yes, everything is lame to a teenage boy. I mean, I think that is just kind of par for the course. But, I tell parents, like, your children, right? If something is off, right? So, if I'm talking to a mother and she's telling me about her kid, I'm like, trust that mother's intuition. But if they're disengaged, like completely disengaged, like normally they would get together and they would do a game night with you, and now all of a sudden they want nothing to do with it. If they're excessively sleeping, if they're isolating in their rooms, or isolating on those video games, and you're not seeing them for a day, 2-3 days without having a real conversation, those I think would be some warning signs. Look at their hygiene. I know that sounds like obvious as an adult, but no, when you're talking about depression, a lot of people give up on things like hygiene because it's really hard. When you're having an episode, like, it can feel hard to do anything.
Right.
And so,
this is interesting because this question is right along what you're talking about, is how are people isolated, right? Like, so, just like you're saying, they're staying in the room, they're playing video games, and this hygiene, I can see that as being in isolation, like not even getting out of bed, not changing, right?
Yeah, I mean, people are being isolated, and I mean, it's just from the physical sense, right? Like, people aren't leaving their houses. Even though doctors are saying, like, you can get outside, you can get sun if you're responsible and socially distancing. There are ways to still get out there and do things responsibly. I'm obviously not encouraging anybody to, go to an enclosed space and throw a big party or anything. But, people are isolating physically, but they're really isolating emotionally, right? Like, there are a lot of times, I may have gone through something in school, and my friends at school were kind of the place where people kind of figured out what was going on with me. And so emotionally, I wasn't going to connect with my parents. I mean, very few teens, they go to their friends. And so if you're isolating and you're depressed and you don't even have an opportunity to see your friends, well, now kind of multiply that feeling.
Well, and one of the things we talked about was that it's not so much your friends also. That's a great like release, but sometimes it's the people that you don't like in your life, right? When you go to work and you have that little conflict over the printer, or this guy that's not, whatever, like those little nuances bring you home and you're like, oh man, I got in a fight with this guy, or that mean client called me again. And the fact that like you're not having those the same is.
But not even just going to school, right? It's getting ready for school, getting out of bed, right? Like, getting out of bed is uncomfortable. Like, doing uncomfortable things is good for you. Getting dressed, that car ride to school, eating breakfast with your family. Like, there are certain routines that I think we just kind of take for granted that they're just nothing. It's just nothingness. But when your routine, you have this routine that you're getting ready an hour or two before school, turns into you're waking up, 5-10 minutes before school, and you just click the join button. Like, I'm sorry, you're just not mentally ready to tackle an academic school day.
That's so interesting. Here's another great question. Sometimes the situation is awkward. What's the best way to start a conversation about mental health?
I mean, I think fortunately for COVID, mental health has been a little bit easier to talk about these days. And especially with teens, I kind of tell parents, like, don't tell them they're going to go talk to a counselor. Don't make them feel like something is wrong. Sometimes I will coach parents and just tell them, just let's go talk to someone. Strike up the conversation as like we're going to have a conversation. That to me, I think is, because there is kind of that stigma, you see in the movies, that person who goes to the therapist and they're laying on the couch and, they're telling them their deepest, darkest stuff. And like, and all of a sudden there's this therapist behind them just taking these notes or whatnot. It's really not like that. The way I like to, structure my sessions is, I have a pretty comfortable office, but really I just want to have a conversation with you.
Totally.
I want to have a conversation with you and figure out like what's not working for you. And so
well, and Dr. ET points out, she's saying exactly what she's loving your energy. She says it's so difficult to find a good therapist, right? I remember talking to my son, and the therapist says, "What's the problem?" And it's almost like the therapists don't get engaged. So, what are some of your pointers in terms of finding a therapist that fits for your particular family needs?
So, one of the things I do tell parents, and because like in my practice, we have a lot of therapists, and when they call, they may ask, well, who do I see? And my response to them, and this is my response to anybody looking for any therapist, is when you're reading that person's profile, make sure it speaks to you, right? Like you want to feel like that person is talking to me and that person is understanding what I'm going through. And not only that, like I think a lot of times when you're talking to the professional, you're a little reluctant to ask some of the questions like, what is your approach? What, like just some of those questions to kind of be a skeptic a little bit. And, don't be afraid to do those kinds of things, because ultimately they're gaining an experience with therapy. And if it's a bad experience, you may be ruining a chance down the line for them when they really do need it. They'll be like, no, I went to a therapist before and it was the worst.
It didn't work, right?
And so you really want to make sure that this is a good pick.
Yeah, find out, make sure they got, the licensing, but also it's more about the chemistry, like the relationship that you guys build.
Sure.
Here's another really interesting question, because we are talking about student health, and a lot of these are children. But Jennifer has a question: how do you encourage an adult friend to get help? Like, what do you think is a good conversation starter?
I guess this would kind of depend on what the issue is, right? If we're talking about, just like motivation, or we're talking about, but if we're talking about like substance use, or we're talking about like addiction and, major depression or suicidal thoughts, I think it is very okay. Like if you're hearing a friend, talking about the same struggles over and over, it's like, hey, having that conversation of like, have you ever thought about talking to someone? Like, have you ever looked into, doing something different? And not, the worst thing you could do is talk at someone and say, you need to see a therapist,
right?
You need to see a therapist. It's like, well, you know what you need to do, like that's not where we want to be coming at it from, a place of like, I love you, I care about you, I want to see you get help. And just really, especially people who are saying the same things over, try something different.
Yeah, no, really, really find that. And if it's not working, find a different therapist. I mean, especially now with, some people are struggling with the remote, because you can do telemedicine, you can do Zoom calls, but there's something about being in the room, right?
Sure.
And so if some people, so maybe, what do you say to people that they like their therapist when they were face to face, but now it's not working on telecom? Would you say, hey, maybe you need to find a different way of thinking,
I mean,
right?
when you find a therapist that works for you, like, you're kind of married to that person. Like it's, you know, and, as a mental health professional, I see a therapist, and I am of the belief, I think everybody should have that kind of outlet in their lives. But, like for me, I started to see some of the, I don't want to say downfalls, but some of the things that were limiting me through telehealth.
Mhm.
Like I was saying, like those routines of like getting ready for school. I think it's also true, right? You're getting yourself mentally ready that 30 minutes, an hour before you go see your therapist. What am I going to talk about? What am I going
Right.
to bring up today? And when it's like 2 minutes before, it's like they're in a different headspace when
Mhm.
they're in front of you. And so, like for me, I have recreated my office. I have a pretty decent sized office where I can socially distance,
Right.
where I do have, devices in there that are cleaning up the air that we're making, it's part of the cost of doing it, but I have to sanitize my office after every session.
Mhm.
Stagger out sessions so people aren't in our waiting rooms. And different populations work differently, like especially teens and young adults, that screen might be a little bit harder, and so like maybe for adults it's a little bit easier,
Mhm.
but I felt like it's something I had to figure it out. It was a situation that I had to figure out, or else it was going to become a problem for me.
No, and I think you're doing a really good job of saying like, hey, you value that connection. You know the eye contact's important, and I hear it. So when I do, so we have a networking event on Wednesday morning, and I try to sometimes get there earlier, just because if you just get there for the first 10 minutes, at least you can like rally into that position. While before, we used to meet in person, shake hands, have to have those awkward like, oh, I don't know what to say to this guy. Oh, what was his name?
Yeah,
And you
it's
can hide.
there is a lot, you know there is a kind of vulnerability about being in a space that's not yours.
Hmm.
There is a, you know, there is a discomfort, about like, oh no, here we go, I'm walking in the door, right? Like there are certain things, and let's be real, like I don't know how distracted they are in the settings that they are, right? Do they have a screen behind them? You
Right.
know, is someone laughing in the living room outside their door? Like, are there things limiting them to getting in that space that they need to,
True. True.
you know?
Because if you're in a space that you don't feel safe, right?
Yeah,
Or a space where you're like isolating already, like that's important, right? No, that's
absolutely. Yeah,
well,
yeah.
I know we want to talk a little bit about this, but you actually created like different ways to adventure learn and like get people outside. So I just want to know a little bit more about what is that therapy? What is the experience like and who can join?
So adventure learning program is, it was something that was born probably about 10 years ago, by a gentleman named Scott Shoemate. And Scott, tragically passed away right before COVID. And it was, and it was something that we kind of took on because we saw the value of it. And what it basically is, it's basically like experiential learning, for teens and young adults. And so it's a way for them to build self-confidence, self-esteem, overcoming fears. And the way we really do that is we go out into the city and we have a bunch of mountain bikes, and we're going to go mountain biking for 2 hours. And we're not like lollygagging, and we're doing real mountain biking, and we are training these kids to, do a week-long mountain biking trip in Big Bend National Park. We're going out to rock gyms, and we're training these kids to go on weekend retreats out in the hill country and do rock climbing. Because one of the things I knew as a teen is sometimes I would go into that room and I would feed you whatever you wanted to hear, and teens are really good at that. But when you're out there in nature, when you're out there, 25, 50 feet up on a rock wall, you cannot BS nature. You cannot BS your fears. Like, they
Totally.
will come out. And it's a really good way to marry kind of adventure, building hobbies, and
Hmm.
mental health. And the kids love it.
Well, and getting out of your comfort zone, right? Like that's one of the things that you were talking about is just going to school, going to work, the original normal. I guess not the new
Yeah,
normal. Trevor's asking, what's the new normal? I go, when's the new normal going to change, right? Is it's all those things that we have to adjust to, right?
sure.
Really make us who we are. And if we don't have those stimulus, right?
Yeah.
We're not making that progress. That's actually a great question from Jennifer. She's asking how important. Wait, physical activity. That's not the question. How important is physical activity for mental health? We'll throw that one in there. She's got another great question.
Well, so I'm not I'm not a physical fitness expert. I'm a mental health expert. But what I do know is, as a person who struggled with his own mental health, and as a person who tries to practice good mental health on a regular basis,
Mhm.
I know for me, physical fitness is key to my mental health. That I need to be moving at a minimum of 30 minutes a day, pretty intensely, right? And in a way, it gets some of that energy out. It's my body is releasing all kinds of chemicals, those feel good chemicals. I'm challenging myself. And so, if you were to ask me personally, I would tell you mental health and physical health are like brother and
Um,
sister, right?
absolutely.
They are one and the same to me. That you can't really, I don't believe you can fully have one without the other.
Right, right. Well, Tamara, my favorite part of the show is we talk about 3 things we can start doing right now to really improve our mental health.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Okay. So the first one I would say is keystone habits, right? Think about, I don't want you to change all your habits. I want you to think about one habit, and I call it the keystone habit. I'm not going to take credit for it, that's been coined before, but it's that one habit, right? That when you do it, it is likely to transform into building other good habits. So we'll take the physical fitness thing, right? If I exercise, well, I'm less likely to stop by the drive-through because I don't want to waste my workout. And if I eat a good meal, my energy level will be up. And if my energy level is up, I am a happier and more pleasant person, right? And so think about that one keystone habit that you've been wanting to work on, and just focus on that one. Don't focus on the 60,000 other ones, just the one. The other one I would say is do something uncomfortable every day. If making your bed is something you don't ever do and that is the uncomfortable thing, make your bed. If that phone call that you don't really want to make is, or that you've been putting off is the thing that's been holding you back, just do it, right? Our growth comes from pushing ourselves out of our comfort zone. And so, and I think part of what we're saying about COVID is we have meditate, you know.
Absolutely. So important. So actually great having you on the show. Can you hear me right now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, good. Something popped up on the screen. I was like, I don't know where we have a countdown, but
Yeah.
it's I love the get out of your comfort zone and just sharing. I mean, your candidates. It's just so important to listen to that. We're all struggling, and we all have a different struggle.
Sure.
And to reach out, I think that's important. Like, guys, pick up the phone. If you can think, one of my favorite was a friend of mine carried a quarter, and this may be too old for some people. We used to be able to put a quarter and a quarter in a phone to make a phone call. So for you young guys, there's this thing on the wall. You put a quarter and you dialed, right? And so she would carry a quarter in her pocket and asked why. She's like, every time I touch it, I think, who would I call? What would I say? What am I waiting for?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, like if you think of someone, call them.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
Because it's just that connection, man. It's so important to just keep it, reach out. People will so appreciate it. And like Jennifer Johnson that's on here, a big shout out because she reaches out. I mean, she's like this mega connector, and not being able to have these networking events. Well, now we're doing it through Zoom. So
I think that's true. Is like we are people that we have to adapt.
mhm,
And if we're not adapting, we're kind of like dying. And so, like,
right,
I don't think anyone envisioned that this would last this long, but it has, and we don't know when it's gonna end. And so it's like, we can't just wait for the doors to open because
right,
if this is becoming the new normal, when we go back to our old normal, we're just going to be overwhelmed with fear and anxiety and social stress. And so, like, do this stuff now so
right.
that, it's going to be uncomfortable regardless. And so, like, take necessary steps now to ensure that when we do get back, like, it isn't the scariest thing in the world for you.
Great advice, Tammer. Thank you so much for being on the show. Would love to get you back on it and like show us a little bit from these adventure series, because
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
mean that sounds like a great opportunity to shift and find that uncomfortable moment that lets us grow. But so timely, so important. Thank you for being on the show today.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right, sir. We'll see you soon. We're going to take you off the air, and man, so important to stay just healthy, stay active. It's been such an important and challenging year. So would love to have you guys put in your comments and just share those little touches. And again, if you've had a quarter, call someone you're thinking about. They'll appreciate it. See you next for 35, guys. Thank you.
Collaborator Expert 35. This is for a better tomorrow and a better today. Let's come together and together we will find a way. You got questions, we got solutions. You got problems, we got resolutions. Visit expert35.com. No need to worry, just remember